Oh. Today's video is going to be about the Garmin Varia and its, let's call it, equivalence and cycling safety. If you look over here, this is my most rowdy bike. It's been on diamonds and double diamonds in British Columbia and southern Alberta, a lot of which, if you follow mountain biking, you've probably seen people go down on YouTube. Like Remy, I just go down a lot slower. Over here is my road bike, and if you follow my channel, I've beat this one to death. What'll surprise you is that if one of these bikes is going to be the death of me, it's likely this one, not this one. One of the things about mountain biking, when you're doing it, is most of the risks you take are what I'll call voluntary. You choose what level of trail you're going to go on. You choose your protective equipment, armor, helmets, etc. You have a completely different hazard when you're on a road bike. And often your fate is in the hands of someone else, or you're basically taking involuntary risks because if you research the statistics, 75% or more of deaths in North America are caused by collisions between road bikes or any bike and vehicles. But specifically, what I'm focusing on today is the rear-facing radars and how they may or may not improve your safety. And don't worry, I will tell you right now, buy one of these, use one of these, but be realistic about what it does for your cycling experience and safety. In probably the last 15 years, there's been significant developments in lighting technology, and of course the new Garmin and its imitators radar. This video is not about detailed specifications of these Varia or rear-facing radars, but nowadays you can get them with cameras in them. And from my overall experience, they're absolutely fantastic at detecting cars coming at you, motorcycles, and even packs of cyclists. I've never had an issue with, let's call it a false negative, where cars come up on me and the alert has not sounded. And I really don't think I've got too many false positives, which means that you get a beep and there's nothing going on. I think in a lot of cases what happens is you'll get the beep, then a vehicle will stop, pull over, or turn off. If you scroll through YouTube and look at lots of videos on these Varia products, you would swear that they're so fantastic that they create a personal force field while you're cycling. What you have to be careful about is cycling marketing as opposed to true safety. Obviously, and I work for a large corporation, the goal of the corporation is to make money. The engineers that design this stuff are separate from the marketing department. And the marketing department, their goal is to sell as much product as possible. So sometimes, in my experience, claims of safety can be over-exaggerated. Well, let's look at helmets. As an example, this is a Gyro Pro Light helmet. I think this is probably 10, 12 years old. One of the lightest helmets ever made with a hard shell. Obviously, the latest and greatest gyro, this is one with that internal MIPS spherical system, is obviously going to be safer for impacts. Even further, if you chose to road this while you were road riding, this might even be safer. But if you consider the hazard, which in a lot of cases in road riding, as I previously said, is a vehicle striking you, then even if you had this sucker on, if a half-ton pickup hits you going 100 kilometers or 60 miles an hour, this is likely not going to make a difference. You're likely toast. So there's really a lack of data on the Garmin Varia and how much it actually improves the safety of cyclists that use it.
And trust me, if there was that data, you'd see it. Like as an example, this gyro helmet. If it made the top tier of the Virginia Tech safety tests, you're going to be sure that's going to be all over the Garmin website. There's going to be advertisements everywhere about that. But this isn't any conspiracy by Garmin.
A 2025 literature review concluded that of the 78 papers they reviewed, only 2 attempted, or in their words, tried to quantify how protective devices reduce your risks. And their final conclusion was more work needs to be done on this topic.
To do a truly valid test, what you'd end up having to do is do it on a road and have 2 groups of cyclists, one using the radar and one not using it. And then you would compare the amount of casualties and injuries for the Garmin group and the non-Garmin group. Do you think that's ever going to happen? We're going to just line up cyclists and 10 of them of 1,000 may die, and that's in the name of science. It'll actually never happen. So this is one where I'll give it to Garmin that there's not a lot of statistics to back up any of the sort of YouTube headlines you see about how fantastic these are.
The risk can be expressed as the hazard times the consequences. In this case, we're talking more mostly about death. So let's focus on hazard. So this is the probability of you getting hit by a vehicle and killed by it. It is a function of, first of all, the probability of you getting impacted by the vehicle. Next is you have a vulnerability. That's whether or not you're going to die. And that is a function of typically the velocity of the vehicle, the mass of the vehicle, and the angle, let's call it, of attack of the vehicle. The Garmin Varia, in some cases, will reduce the probability of your impact by an action you will take.
Looking at the overall usefulness of a Garmin, if we're in the city riding, you simply get too many alerts for it to be meaningful or useful to you. When you go to, let's say, the suburbs, it gets a little bit better where traffic gets less frequent. But if it's continuous, once again, you'll tend to ignore your Garmin. And then when you get to the country, that's an awful looking cow, by the way. This is where the Garmin becomes more useful. As the road becomes narrower, your alert device becomes less and less useful. The issue is there's not a lot of room for you to go anywhere. My expensive radar can't tell me whether the motorist coming up is inebriated, incapacitated, or generally distracted. When we're in a rural scenario with intermittent traffic, this is where the Garmin Varia can shine. So say we're a single rider and there's shoulder room on the road. This is positive. We can move over to reduce our potential of getting hit. When we're in a group in a pack, we can go single file and we can move over on the shoulder to reduce our potential to get hit. Now when we're in a group, but there's no room and we're spread out in a pack, we get an alert, someone yells car back, and at least we go single file. So there is a slight improvement there. The issue is when you're single rider and there's no shoulder room and you get a beep and you're already over, there's exactly nothing you can do as a result of that Varia's alert to improve your safety unless you dive off the road.
In my riding region, oftentimes there's what I'll call pinch points.
So when I talked before about that probability of impact, if your Garmin beeps, there's exactly nowhere for you to go safely. Now, if you look in the links down below I provided, there's a really good video by Clint Gibbs on these, and he uses a bike mirror, but we all know that friends don't let friends use bike mirrors. And what he'll do is he'll move over into the grass if he sees that a vehicle is not yielding or there's an oncoming vehicle, but he lives in Florida. I can't do that in the mountains in a lot of cases where I ride in Penticton, British Columbia. If I was a safety professional for a large corporation, I'd probably ban personal road riding, simply because everything we rely on for safety is on their hierarchy of controls in the lower rung called personal protective equipment, helmets, these radars, etc. So what they'd be looking for is, as an example, elimination, where there's no cars on the road or you don't go riding. I mean, that's not realistic. Another example would be, and there's the much maligned bike lanes that we have, and when you put a physical barrier, like a curb between you and the traffic lane, that would be, as an example, better considered an engineering control. Let's hammer home how someone in corporate safety would look at what you're doing if you're a single rider on a narrow road with this Garmin Varia. It'd be the equivalent of, say for instance, I was working at an industrial site and I decided that I would put a device to detect falling objects on the top of my hard hat and wear that while I walk down a narrow corridor, and if something fell, I'd get a beep. And the only chance I would have to avoid it maybe would be to dodge or move back or forward. From a corporate safety point of view, that is unacceptable. Now, of course, we have to live our lives and we have to ride on the road. How can you reduce risk? I had to think about this carefully in my region, and what I decided is that where there are pinch points, or where what I had what's called near misses while riding, cars coming too close to me, I stopped riding those during tourist season, which is in Penticton, BC, from June to September. And in particular, where the Skull and Crossbones is the Naramata Road. On top of the road being tight and turny with no shoulder, there's also 15 wineries offering wine tours during the summer. I don't need to say much more about that, do I? The other thing during peak tourist season I tend to do in this area is we have a lot of rail trails, and when I'm doing my long, slow distance or easy rides, I just ride on gravel or on the rail trails. So effectively, there are no vehicles, so I've removed the hazard completely. Wrapping up, I absolutely recommend for most cyclists using a rear-facing radar. But beware of their limitations in cities, busy roads, and when you're on a road which has no shoulder, so you can't move anywhere. So there's actually really no effective increase in your safety. The risk is still the same of you getting struck by a vehicle. So with that, if you like my content, please like, consider subscribing, and until next time, ride hard.